A candle flickered against the stone wall of Cumnor Place. The wooden staircase groaned in the silence, and then came the scream. A maid had rushed in from the corridor, her breath sharp, her eyes wide. At the bottom of the stairs lay her mistress, Amy Robsart. Her body was twisted, her neck broken, her gown spilling across the steps like a pool of pale silk. Outside, the village fair rang with laughter and fiddles. Inside, the only sound was the rush of feet and the crash of a candle holder falling to the floor. Shadows stretched across the hall as servants gathered, trembling at the sight. Some crossed themselves. Others whispered that no fall could look like this. The air smelled of wax and cold stone, but beneath it hung something heavier, the sense that they had just stepped into a crime scene. Earlier that morning, Amy had insisted they leave her alone. She ordered every servant to attend the fair at Abingdon, her voice unusually sharp. Why would she drive away every witness? Did she plan her own end? Or did someone know she would be left defenseless? The news reached Windsor before the day was out. At the Queen's table, the music died. Goblets stilled. Elizabeth looked toward Robert Dudley, her closest companion, now entangled in whispers of murder. A single body at the bottom of a staircase had shaken the heart of a kingdom. Was Amy Robsart a woman crushed by despair, or the victim of hands hidden in shadow? Her broken form remains a riddle carved into Tudor history. Stay with this story until the end, for what follows is not only the death of one woman, but the beginning of a mystery that bound a queen to scandal. And if you wish to keep walking with us through history's darkest corridors, subscribe now and do not look away. The court at Windsor still shimmered with music when the rider arrived. His boots struck the marble floor, echoing like the toll of a bell. He knelt before the Queen and spoke with a voice heavy from the road. "My Lady Amy Robsart is dead." The words fell into the silence like stones into water. Every gaze turned to Robert Dudley. He did not move at first. His lips pressed together, his hand gripping the carved edge of a table. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "I have been here with Her Majesty all day. You all know this." His eyes swept the room, daring anyone to contradict him. The alibi was solid, yet the whispers began at once. Elizabeth's courtiers leaned toward each other, their voices sharp and low. Dudley's ambition had been the subject of gossip for months. Now his wife was gone, and no one believed in coincidence. An inquiry was ordered. Witnesses spoke, their words recorded, their faces pale with unease. One courtier later recalled Dudley saying, "I wish she would be gone, for then I might be free." Was it a jest? Or was it truth spoken carelessly in a moment of frustration? Dudley's servants were pressed for detail. One recalled the night before Amy's death. He paced his chamber. The man confessed and spoke of fortune waiting, if only one burden were lifted. The servant lowered his head, unwilling to say more. The coroner's jury returned a verdict of accident, but the verdict satisfied no one. Elizabeth herself seemed torn between loyalty and doubt. She allowed Dudley to remain by her side, yet she refused him the one thing he craved. The crown would not bind itself to a man shadowed by such suspicion. Still, Dudley defended his name. "I loved my wife," he declared before those who accused him, "and her death brings me no joy." Yet even as the words left his mouth, a murmur rose in the chamber. Some believed him, others shook their heads. William Cecil, Elizabeth's sharp-eyed advisor, noted quietly in his journal, "It is too great a matter for Her Majesty's honor to marry him. This death, though judged an accident, will never be clean." Dudley walked the halls of power after that day, with every step weighed down by unseen chains. He was a man in favor, yet every whisper behind his back carried the same poison. Did he grieve, or did he secretly rejoice? History left no answer, only shadows that lengthened with each passing year. The image of him standing in Windsor on the day the news arrived still lingers, surrounded by the glitter of the court, with Elizabeth's eyes fixed on him. He was a man both trusted and condemned. His voice insisting on innocence was strong, but the silence of the hall spoke louder. "Her death was no accident," one rival whispered, "and we all know whose future it cleared." The inquiry into Amy Robsart's death soon turned its gaze to the servants of Cumnor Place. They were the last to see her alive, and their voices carried the weight of suspicion and sorrow. The first to speak was a maid named Bridget. Her hands trembled as she wrung the cloth of her apron, her eyes fixed on the wooden floor. "That morning," she whispered, "my lady insisted we leave. She told us to go to the fair at Abingdon, every one of us. She said she wished for solitude." The clerk recording her words looked up sharply. Did she seem troubled? Bridget swallowed hard. Her voice was firm, almost too firm. It was not like her. She pushed us away as though she feared our presence. Another servant, John Flowerdew, offered a different shade of detail. His voice was rough, his brow damp with sweat as he faced the jurors. "She did not eat. She only walked the corridors. I asked if she wished for company, and she smiled, but her smile was thin. Then she said, 'Go, all of you. Leave me to my thoughts.'" The jurors leaned closer. One asked, "Did she speak of ending her life?" John shook his head violently. "No, my lords. She spoke of thoughts, not of death." The contrast in their testimonies deepened the mystery. If Amy longed to be alone, was it despair that drove her to dismiss the household? Or did she know another presence would arrive once the halls were emptied? When pressed further, Bridget added a detail that chilled the chamber. She looked at the stair as we left. Not long, but long enough that I remember it now. Her eyes were strange, as though she had seen her fate waiting there. Murmurs filled the room. Was this the vision of a woman prepared for her own end, or the silent dread of someone who knew a hand would push her where no witness could see? The servants who returned from the fair described the horror that met them. One said, "The hall was too still. The air itself felt wrong." Then we found her, and the sound of her neck snapping seemed to echo through no one had heard it fall. Another swore he saw bruises on her arms, though the record softened his words, marking them only as uncertain. In the dim chamber of the inquest, the voices of the household twisted the truth rather than revealed it. Each answer opened another question. Did Amy plan her own solitude, or was she maneuvered into it? Was her dismissal of the servants the act of despair, or a trap laid by another's design? Outside, crowds whispered their own verdicts. Some pitied a woman abandoned by her husband, imagining she cast herself into death. Others believed she was silenced. Her life ended to clear the way for Robert Dudley and his queen. Every word from the servants became fuel for rumor, each testimony a fragment of a puzzle that refused to form a picture. The coroner listened, the clerk wrote, and the servants departed with bowed heads. None of them had seen the moment Amy fell, yet all of them carried pieces of her final hours. The staircase stood in silence, offering no answers, only the dark stain of a death that could not be undone. The inquiry moved on, but the servants' voices lingered in the air. One maid had said, "She looked at the stair," a simple memory, yet it clung to the imagination like smoke. Did she look because she chose it, or because she feared it? That question would haunt every step of the investigation still to come. Among the names whispered in the aftermath of Amy Robsart's death, one rose again and again: Sir Richard Verney. He was a loyal retainer of Robert Dudley, a man of hard features and a reputation for doing what others would not. Though absent from Cumnor Place on the morning Amy was found, stories of his involvement spread like wildfire. The inquest never accused him directly. No witness placed him at the scene, yet pamphlets that circulated years later painted him as the unseen hand, the enforcer who might have done what Dudley could not, even in his lifetime. Verney carried the stain of suspicion. A witness recalled overhearing him months before the tragedy. The account recorded: Sir Richard spoke in jest, that my lord might find his fortunes easier if his lady were no more. Such words could have been careless humor, yet when weighed against the death that followed, they echoed like prophecy. When questioned, Verney defended himself fiercely. "I was not in Cumnor, nor near it," he declared, his voice cutting through the chamber. "I served my master with honor, and no blade of mine ever touched his wife." But the very strength of his denial gave some pause. Men accustomed to blood did not usually raise their voices unless pressed by guilt. The Queen's advisor, William Cecil, noted quietly that Verney's name was too convenient. To lay the guilt upon him was to spare Dudley while keeping him shackled by suspicion. Cecil observed, "If this man is guilty, the proof lies buried with the lady. If he is innocent, the rumor is his prison." Ballads and verses soon wove Verney into the tale. Poets described him as a shadow standing at the foot of the stair, a figure who vanished before the servants returned. Some swore his presence could be felt in the silence of Cumnor Place. Though he never crossed its threshold that day, his name became less a man than a symbol. The specter of murder whispered from taverns to courtly chambers. Years later, chroniclers such as William Camden recorded that Verney was widely believed to have played a role in Amy's death. The rumor did not fade with time. Instead, it hardened, until even scholars treated his name as inseparable from the scandal. He had become the perfect suspect, not because of evidence, but because of the shape of his character. Verney's own life after 1560 was marked by this shadow. Though he remained in Dudley's service, his honor was never clean. A courtier once remarked, "When Verney enters a hall, men glance behind him, as though he drags a ghost in his wake." He lived with that ghost until his death in 1574 and beyond, for history refused to let his reputation rest. The truth may never have involved him at all. He might have been nothing more than a convenient scapegoat, a soldier whose loyalty made him an easy target for rumor. Yet the silence of the official record only sharpened suspicion. Why was his name never cleared? Why was his denial never repeated in stronger form? As the inquiry closed, Verney walked free, but outside the chamber, his guilt became part of the legend. To this day, whenever Amy Robsart's fall is retold, Sir Richard Verney's shadow lies at the bottom of the stair. Whether he was present in body or only in rumor, his figure remains fixed in the story, a reminder that in the Tudor court, suspicion itself was often more powerful than proof. the inquiry could not ignore the man who owned the house where Amy Robsart's body was found. Anthony Forster, master of Cumnor Place, was neither a stranger to politics nor a man unknown to Robert Dudley. He had once served in Parliament and managed estates with a reputation for order. Yet in the autumn of 1560, his name became forever bound to the shadows of suspicion. Forster was summoned before the jurors, his manner controlled, his words measured. He swore he had been absent at the time of Amy's fall. Still, questions crowded around him. Why had he allowed his household to scatter on the very morning that fate struck? Why had he not provided clearer testimony about what he knew of Amy's state of mind? His calmness was unsettling. A maid whispered later that he looked not like a grieving host, but like a man rehearsing lines from memory. Whispers outside the court grew sharper. Forster was accused of turning Cumnor Place into a prison for Dudley's wife, of keeping her isolated and watched. Though no proof was offered, the idea found eager listeners. His home had become the stage for a royal scandal, and in scandal, the role of jailer was almost as damning as that of assassin. One neighbor recalled hearing Forster speak weeks before the tragedy. He said Lady Amy was a burden to her lord, and that burdens sometimes find their end in silence. The jurors recorded this remark, though Forster denied it with indignation. "I never spoke such words. I am a servant of the realm, not a dealer in misfortune." His denial carried weight, but the memory lingered. What marked Forster's role was not direct accusation of murder, but the heavy suspicion that he knew more than he admitted. Some believed he discovered the body before the servants returned and gave orders to prepare the hall. Others believed he kept quiet because silence was safer than truth. His position as master of the house meant every creak of the staircase, every flicker of the candle belonged to him. If there was a secret to be told, he alone held the key. The scandal followed him long after the inquiry ended. Ballads sang of Cumnor Place as a house of death, its master stained by complicity. A later poet described Forster as a man who locked the doors of truth and left the stair to speak alone. The image clung to him even as he continued his service in local politics, as though no civic honor could wash away the taint of that day. In time, Forster's reputation blurred into legend. Some claimed he confessed on his deathbed, though records of such words are uncertain. Others insisted he died with dignity, never acknowledging any part in Amy's fate. The absence of clarity allowed myth to thrive, and in that myth, Anthony Forster became the silent custodian of a mystery that refused to fade. What is certain is that his name was never cleared. Each retelling of Amy's fall returned to Cumnor Place, and each return placed Forster in the frame. He might not have laid a hand upon her, yet history judged him as the man who allowed the tragedy to unfold within his walls. His house stood as the stage of the crime, and he as its unwilling impresario. Thus, the staircase of Cumnor Place carried not only the weight of a broken body, but also the burden of a host whose silence thundered through the ages. Anthony Forster became another figure caught in the labyrinth of suspicion, a reminder that in the Tudor world, to own the house of death was to own a portion of its guilt. While others were judged by rumor, one man used the scandal as a weapon. William Cecil, principal secretary to Queen Elizabeth, was no stranger to intrigue. His mind was sharp, his pen sharper, and he understood that the crown could be destroyed not only by armies, but by whispers. Cecil never stood at Cumnor Place. He never saw Amy Robsart's broken form at the foot of the stair. Yet he saw what mattered most. He saw how the death of Robert Dudley's wife could be turned into a cage for the Queen's most trusted companion. In council chambers, Cecil rarely raised his voice. Instead, he spread doubt with careful precision. "It is too great a matter for Her Majesty's honor," he remarked in confidence, "that she should think of marriage to a man whose wife has died so suddenly." The words were not accusation, but they carried the weight of a verdict. Behind closed doors, Cecil ensured that the story of Amy's fall traveled swiftly. Pamphlets echoed the suspicion. Courtiers whispered of Dudley's ambition. Ambassadors wrote to their masters abroad, warning that the English queen was entangled in scandal. Each rumor tied Dudley tighter to guilt, whether proven or not. Cecil's motives were practical. A marriage between Elizabeth and Dudley would have alienated foreign powers, endangered alliances, and diminished Cecil's influence. The scandal of Amy's death provided the perfect tool to prevent it. He did not need to prove Dudley guilty. He only needed to remind the world that guilt was possible. Elizabeth, torn between affection and duty, yielded to the pressure. Though she kept Dudley near, granting him lands and honors, she never allowed their bond to become marriage. Cecil had achieved his aim. The Virgin Queen would remain unwed, her crown untainted by a consort with blood on his hands. Historians later debated whether Cecil truly believed Dudley guilty, or whether he merely exploited circumstance. Perhaps he was convinced that ambition had driven Dudley to rid himself of Amy. Perhaps he simply saw an opportunity and seized it. Either way, the outcome was the same. Cecil secured the stability of the throne, but at the cost of leaving a death forever unanswered. His genius was not in action, but in silence. He never accused, never condemned. He let others speak, then recorded their words with the precision of a clerk sharpening a blade. In doing so, he turned rumor into truth, and truth into a tool of statecraft. Thus, William Cecil became the quiet prosecutor of Amy Robsart's memory. He never stood in judgment before a court, yet his verdict shaped the rest of Elizabeth's reign. Dudley rose, but never high enough. The Queen ruled, but always alone. And Amy's death remained a shadow Cecil never tried to dispel, because shadows were often more useful than light. The staircase of Cumnor Place no longer stands. Its wood has rotted. Its stones have been carried away. And yet the echo of that September day in 1560 has never vanished. Amy Robsart's fall became more than the death of one woman. It turned into a mark upon an entire reign, a riddle that bound a queen, her favorite, and her enemies in chains of suspicion. Her burial was quiet, yet her absence thundered. Robert Dudley's ambition was reshaped. Elizabeth's image hardened into the solitary figure of the Virgin Queen. William Cecil secured his strategy through whispers. Richard Verney carried the stain of rumor, and Anthony Forster's silence became part of the legend. Each of them was bent beneath the weight of the broken body found at the bottom of a lonely stair. The people of England spun their own versions of the tale. In taverns, they spoke of murder, of Dudley hiring men to rid himself of a wife. In churchyards, they whispered that Amy had taken her own life, abandoned and humiliated. Some said she was the victim of a hidden plot, her death staged to ensnare Elizabeth in scandal. No verdict silenced the rumors, and so the mystery grew stronger with every telling. As years passed, the story became a living thing. Ballads sang of the Lady of Cumnor. Chroniclers argued across pages. Poets imagined her last steps as she looked toward the stair. Historians still weigh the testimonies, turning each phrase like a relic, hoping to hear truth in the silence. But the silence refuses to speak. It lingers as a shadow, clinging to the memory of the house. a shadow that stretches far beyond the Tudor age. For Elizabeth, the tragedy became a prison more binding than any stone wall. She could never marry Dudley, and she could never marry any other man without inviting new storms of suspicion. Amy's ghost stood between her and every suitor, whispering that love and power could never share the same crown. For Dudley, the shadow was even darker. He rose high, won commands, gained titles, but he never escaped the whispers that he had profited from his wife's fall. Every honor he received tasted of ash. Every glance carried the memory of Cumnor. The ghost of Amy walked beside him until his final day, and Amy herself, remembered not as a daughter or a wife but as a question. Her life was eclipsed by the moment of her death. She became less a person than a symbol, less a voice than a riddle. History wrote her as silence, and yet that silence remains louder than words. Close your eyes and imagine standing at the foot of that stair. Hear the faint creak of wood. See the candlelight flicker. Feel the stillness before a servant's cry breaks the air. A gown spread across the stone, a neck bent unnaturally, a silence pressing down with the weight of eternity. This is why the story endures. It is not only the fall of Amy Robsart, it is the fall of certainty itself. So we ask again, was Amy a woman crushed by despair? Was she betrayed by the man who longed for a crown? Or was she the victim of a design woven by hands that never revealed themselves? The truth may be lost, but the mystery remains, and it binds the memory of a queen who ruled alone. If this tale of shadows and unanswered questions has held you until the end, do not let it vanish into silence. Like this story, share it with those who hunger for the secrets of the past, and subscribe so that together we may keep walking through history's darkest corridors, where power and betrayal leave their marks long after the bodies are gone.